Hey, I'm back to do a quick review of the app called iOverlander and a little tutorial, not just a review, but a tutorial to show you how to use it. I love this app and we used it full time on our 3-week sabbatical vacation anniversary trip recently, and I can't stop singing its praises, so I wanted to make a video about how to use it. It's really easy to use, and so I'm going to show you what it looks like real quick on my iPhone. It looks like this. It's pretty simple interface. The top part has a map and a list of locations near you, and then you can kind of zoom out from there on a map, and then you can look at your past check-ins and your history of places that you visited. So pretty simple on the iPhone app. And you can also use their website to do the exact same thing with trip planning. So my tutorial today is going to be on their website because it's got a bigger screen, a wider screen that fits this format better, and a little bit more visibility. So I'll be showing you my screen and showing you kind of the story of how we made our way through Eastern Oregon and found our way past many obstacles and found places to sleep at night because of iOverlander. It was much easier to use iOverlander in Utah, where there are lots and lots of BLM spaces and people adventuring all over the place and discovering new wild campsites and dry campsites, which is really what iOverlander is best known for, even though they do list public and private campgrounds as well. They're mostly used and associated with and for dry camping or wild camping or boondocking, as you might say. So we used it for that in Utah, and it got a little bit more useful in places like northern Idaho and eastern Oregon, where it's just really vast wilderness and you don't have a lot of camping options. So I wanted to show you a kind of a worst case scenario in eastern Oregon where there weren't a lot of campgrounds nearby and we ran into inclement weather. So we were kind of in a bind, and iOverlander really came to the rescue. So I'll kind of tell you the story of our trip so that it makes sense why we made these decisions and backtracked and made other plans for campsites and why we needed the app so badly. We know Eastern Oregon pretty well. We live in Western Oregon, so we've been there quite a bit. My husband hunts there all the time. So these are roads that we're pretty familiar with, and yet we had a lot of trouble finding the campsites that we were looking for and ended up needing alternate campsites. So I will show you by kind of moving over here to the left where we started. We're coming from Idaho, coming through Boise, and came into Oregon at the border near Ontario, which is right here. It's under this little 5 number. We went up through John Day on I-84, which is the only major highway or freeway in the area, and passed through Baker City, where I-84 turns northward, and we went up to La Grande, and we went a little further than La Grande and turned off on this little highway here. Our plan was to go to Heppner, and we were going to camp in Heppner, which is right over here. And so we turned off and went to Ukiah. We went to Ukiah and turned. The easiest way to get to Heppner from Ukiah is going north on this little highway here, but it's going over a mountaintop, well, a higher elevation space. And there had been a freak snowstorm in April, and we were not aware that the snow hadn't melted yet. So it was a week after the snowstorm. We thought the snow had melted. We ended up in our camper van driving on this road, and it was very, very thick with snow. And by the time we reached this campsite, we had to turn around and go back to Ukiah and make other plans. So I looked at these 3 campsites down here using iOverlander, and this is the map feature that you'll see on your phone or on your desktop. And this little sign here, if you look at Show Legend, you can see that means established campground. So it's going to be owned by someone, whether it's the government or a private landowner, and it's a business, so it's going to be someplace that you usually would pay for. Or this little moon, half moon hanging in the air, indicates a wild campsite, so that's going to be on public land and that's going to be free. all the other things here I don't really pay that much attention to. Sometimes I'll click on, let's see, on my place types, I will select established campgrounds, informal campgrounds, wild campgrounds, water, and sanitation or dump station. Those are the main ones that I click on so that those emblems show up on my map. Anyway, so this is a tent, so it means that it's an established or pay campground, and these two moon ones are free campgrounds. So those were the first three that we looked at. None of them sounded very great, and we were going to be headed south anyway because we wanted to go over here and start the Painted Hills scenic drive. So we were going to be going south, so we looked at the next one on this list, and it said fishing. So I'm going to click on this and show you. So this is a free public land campsite. It's called Long River Pond. That's what someone called it when they entered it in here on iOverlander as an entry. And the description's pretty short. It says local spot for fishing off-road. Close to Long Creek, Oregon. Minimal traffic, good cell coverage. No facilities, dry camping. So that's a really good description, and that's a pretty average description of the things that you would mention if you started a new place or site on this, which you can very easily do, and I've done a few times just in this trip. And you can also click on check-in and leave your own entry and update anything that's missing or changed since that original entry. So we thought that sounded like a cool campsite. We had never been there before, and it was getting dark, and so we really wanted to find a place to camp. So we went to this one. Now, we lost cell service right about here on the map, and so we weren't sure. I hadn't paid attention to the fact that you need to go into the town of Long Creek and then back up this road here to get to this campsite, and all of a sudden we were losing cell service. So on iOverlander, you're going to get a little beacon that shows you in blue. It's going to show you moving towards your destination in blue, a little dot, and then you're going to see your destination. Even if you don't have cell service, you'll see those two things on the map. But you may not see this river and this highway that you're on, and you probably won't see, if you don't have cell service, you probably won't see the names of towns. So you won't necessarily know what direction to go first before you get to the right road. Thankfully, I was able to get a map on one of our phones really quickly and see that the highway we were on led to Long Creek, and Long Creek was the town where this road came off of, where it looked like it was pretty likely we were headed. So we found the pond very easily because of that luck. And that's one reason why it would be really good to chart out your journey in advance. But like I said, a lot of times you run into snow and obstacles and things you don't expect. And so you just have to kind of look for something. And if you're in the middle of Eastern Oregon, you're going to want to look for something that is close to a road or a highway, and something that is reputable and something that has a pretty good review on iOverlander. So we found this pond. It was lovely. My husband fished into the evening, past dusk, and really enjoyed it there. It was a little bit snowy still. There was a couple patches of snow on one of the banks of the pond. But it was really pretty, and woke up to our van right on the edge of the pond. It wasn't quite as nice as having made it to Heppner, where there was a lake and we could have gone kayaking, but it was a really nice second choice. So the next day we had another plan that didn't work out. We were going to go over here to the town of Kimberly from Long Creek, and we were already on the way on the right road. Happened that we were on the right road to the place we wanted to go next. And we already had these three campsites in mind that we had seen before. They're all three right on the John Day River, and we had thought that that was a beautiful place and we'd want to go camping there someday. We got there the next morning and saw that the John Day River was way overflowing and rushing and very, very fast rapids. So we weren't going to go kayaking on the John Day River that day, probably because of that snowstorm and all the snow melt that was melting into the river. So we weren't going to be camping on the John Day River, needless to say, and we needed a second backup place. And my husband thought that he remembered there being one called Bull Prairie something. And so we looked for that and found it on Google when we got into range and had a signal. And we wandered up there. It was at the top of a hill, and it was pretty snowy up there, but it was safe enough to drive. And actually, this is now an entry on iOverlander because I created an entry myself. So this was a really bizarre campground. It is an established campground. It's a formal campground that normally you would pay money to camp at, but during the spring, early spring part of the year when we were there was no staff there to take our money, and so we didn't pay. And there were other people camping there as well. So it was open, it wasn't locked, and for some reason they kept it open and unsupervised for people to use during the early spring when it wasn't formally open. So I created this lengthy entry about it because it was such a complex kind of site. So you can see if you click on this, the description shows the location, the lake, and you'll always want to make the entry when you're on site so you'll get the GPS coordinates right, and iOverlander figures that out for you. And this is my description that I wrote. The fees are $14 a night, $19 for a double site, but we weren't able to find anyone to pay, and so it was free during this part of the year. I gave them a couple photos. This is one of the lake, and this is one of our kayaks on the lake when the sun was shining. And that was the only check-in. So there's no other check-ins other than mine. So I have now made this a possible place for other people to discover. On the phone app, the face page just has a couple options. It has map, list, and that shows locations near where you're at the time. It will always be tracking where you're at and show you locations near where you're at. You can always zoom out and go someplace else though. And then down below it'll say places that you've checked in or check-in history. On the laptop app or their website, you have to go to My Account and Check-ins in order to see your check-in history. And this gives my entire history of places and the dates that I checked in there. And I always check in at every campsite that we go to after discovering iOverlander, just so that I have a record of what it was like to stay there in my own words. I have not the greatest memory, especially for things like campsites. So just knowing the names of places that we've been, the dates that we were there has been really handy too. Again, this is not going to show you the kind of Airbnb sites that allow you to park in someone's driveway and pay $20 and pay that site, and then the site gives them a percentage of that fee. This is just a public service, totally offered for free, volunteer-based. I make an entry like this Bull Prairie Campground entry, and then they have volunteers that will check it out and make sure that it's for real and that it's likely to be true that it is free to camp there if I've said that it's free to camp there. And then they'll approve it and publish it, and a few days later it'll be on there with my name as the person that left the review or entry. So you can always leave additional reviews or entries and updates or check-ins, they call them, and give details that were missed in the original entry or entries. And so there's a kind of an unending log of information that maybe every year or so you get an update, and if there hasn't been a check-in there by someone else in the last year, it's very considerate to do a check-in so people know that it is up to date. So I always did that for that reason too. Just going down on my list of places that I've checked in, a really cool place that we found on the Columbia River Gorge in Oregon here was called the Memaloose Overlook, and it was just an overlook site overlooking the highway and the gorge, but it was high enough up that the noise from the highway and the noise from the railroad tracks next to the river were not an issue for sleeping. So that's a really good issue too. Like if you're parking near a highway, you want to see where people have found places where there's a little bit more distance from the highway, where there's not a lot of noise to keep you up at night. And so a lot of iOverlander entries will talk about the noise level, talk about the lack of noise or the maybe the hill or the grove of trees that's blocking you from the freeway noise or the highway noise. Because a lot of times you'll be looking for sites that are right next to a highway. So those are some of the cool ones in Eastern Oregon that we found that we actually got to fish at. Another one that was really cool was in Idaho. It was called King Hill / Snake River. And I think this is my update. Yeah, this is my update that I left here too. So it says, nothing else wild listed from here to Ontario, so we stopped early. Had our choice of spots on a Friday at 4 p.m. Train tracks are directly across on the opposing bank of the river, but didn't hear any trains after dark. Very windy on the highway today, not quite as bad down here. Lovely view of the sunset on the water. No bugs. Saw 2 pelicans float by. Bit of broken glass. I always like to see if there's broken glass or if there's like refuse laying around, so that people will know that it's not a very well kept site. Sometimes there can be, and it's just pretty unpredictable. If you go to this entry, you can see that my update was updating from information left by someone else originally, which was way back in 2019. The original post says, single campsite with stone fire ring, established boat launch with vault outhouse. Right on the Snake River, train can be noisy, but otherwise serene and scenic. So you can see that I'm just amending that entry. So I'm not going to repeat that same information. That's the basic information that everyone needed looking there. So everyone sees that first. And then if you want to, you can scroll and see all these other entries updating it. This person says it was a level spot next to the riverbank. So the first person didn't mention how level it was. So that's something you might want to look for too. This one says there are plenty of cool birds and an otter swimming back and forth. So if you like wildlife, you might be looking for something like that. So that's my review and tutorial of this amazing app. It's run by volunteers. When you make a new entry, the volunteers check out the entry and make sure that it's based on reality. And so there's no cost, there's no ads, unlike a lot of other apps. You won't see any advertisements on this one. And so it's a really simple interface. Anyone can use it. There's not, especially when you're using the phone app version. Super, super simple. You just want to remember that GPS will work when you don't have a cell signal, but the map may not show up on your phone. That's the main thing to remember. So of course you don't know in advance when you're going to have a cell signal. So just paying attention to the map ahead of time and doing maybe a screenshot every now and then would be helpful too, I think. But I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and most of my videos on this channel are about my camper van and the adventures that we take in the camper van. So stay tuned for more of those. Probably not so many tutorials, but I also have 2 other channels based on health and nutrition and wellness, and sometimes a vlog here and there. So I hope you'll check those out too, and I'll see you in one of those videos. Take care.